Hello, my name's Susan Reid and I'm the Chief Executive of Victim Support Northern Ireland, and what I'm going to try to do in the next couple of minutes is share with you some of the work that we've been doing over in Northern Ireland to make sure that how we work with people that have been affected by crime is safe for the person, the victim, safe for the member of staff and safe for the volunteer. We've been working over the last couple of years to look for the researched evidence for why emotional support actually works for people affected by crime. And working with a consultant psychotherapist and psychologists, what we've come to understand in the last year is that what we do is very close to what the World Health Organization describes as psychological first aid. Psychological first aid is recognised now by both the World Health Organization and by the National Institute of Clinical Excellence as the most appropriate response to somebody that's experienced a traumatic event. For us, that's good news because it now means that we have a very clear evidence base to present to other stakeholders, whether it's the police or prosecution services or the court service, in terms of the efficacy of what we do. But it also presents some challenge for how we do things, and that's what I'm going to try to outline in the next couple of minutes. So, psychological first aid. I think the best way to summarise it is in three distinct parts. First of all, it's about practical, non-judgmental support. That's something we in Victim Support recognise as a key part of what we do for people who have been affected by crime. But the second part is perhaps more of a challenge for the way we've traditionally offered people support, because it's very important not to ask the person to retell their story. What psychological first aid emphasises is the need for somebody to be asked to talk about the impact, how it has affected them. The third element is that we should provide a sense of normalisation, helping people both understand what they're experiencing and helping them to understand what they might expect to experience in the next while after the event, and to help them understand for themselves and make sense of that. So in essence then, staff and volunteers need to recognise psychological symptoms. They need to facilitate referral to appropriate or other appropriate services, and they need to focus on the emotional and physical safety of the person and other persons that they may be in contact with. And they need to provide assistance to help the person access support in a way that helps them understand what's happening to them and basically take the sense of control back. One of the points that the definition of psychological first aid emphasises is that it's absolutely essential that the person needs to have a choice as to whether to take up help. We know how crime can often rob a person of their sense of control, their sense of empowerment, and therefore it's even more important that we recognise the need for somebody to make a conscious decision about whether they want to take up that help of support. And that's why psychological first aid as a model of service emphasises the importance of how the offer is actually made. We can broadly categorise people who have been affected by crime into three groups. The first group would be those who are not obviously impacted by crime. They may be resilient, they may have adequate support in their own networks. For them, it's a relatively easy and straightforward to know what the right thing to do is. It's about offering them victim support, and that in itself as a future reference will meet their needs. The second group are those who may present as distressed to police, and indeed again it's relatively easy to understand how best to respond to their needs in terms of, with the help of police, to have the contact information to offer those people an explanation and assistance to understand what's happening, and then to help them access other services as is appropriate. The third category, those people who don't display distress, are probably the most challenging to help because they themselves may not realise how they've been affected and therefore are unlikely to come forward and ask for help. Under the model of psychological first aid, we can understand that the category of crime can be a broad indication of whether or not somebody may be more likely to express or to experience psychological symptoms in the future. But it's also another big clue is where somebody is not actually showing any symptoms at all, any obvious distress. That might be the very indication that they are going to head into difficulties in the future. So for those of us who are working in the field of trying to help people ameliorate the effect of crime, I think we'll recognise very quickly that those who show least distress are often the most challenging of people to support in terms of identifying their need and actually then helping them. There are some indications that we can look for to give us a clue as to who needs most attention. The category of crime, while not an absolute indicator, is some clue. So therefore, crimes such as murder, manslaughter, domestic violence, sexual violence are probably a clue that more attention needs to be paid, certainly, to the impact on the individual. But there's also another pattern that we need to pay attention to, and that's where somebody has experienced the same sort of crime on more than one occasion. And indeed, if somebody is presenting and describing their feelings as feeling numb or cut off from the world and from their relationships, that's also a big clue that we need to pay particular attention. The model of psychological first aid, divided into the three sections of being supportive, educational and normalising, provides a very safe and appropriate way then to explore the needs of the person without encouraging them to tell the story again. What has been identified through research is that formerly what was known as critical incident debriefing, where indeed the person was very clearly encouraged to tell the story, that telling of the story can itself cause further psychological harm. So this is a key part of psychological first aid, that by exploring what the person's feeling, by exploring the impact on them, by helping them find the space to work that through and then to look to the future, that in itself is the best and safest way to actually assess the needs of that individual. The National Institute of Clinical Excellence talk about watchful waiting, that what we're doing is paying attention, and paying attention with people in a way where we're going to make contact with them after we've had a face-to-face meeting with them to check in whether they're feeling better or indeed whether they're feeling worse. So, psychological first aid, I think the two key messages that I'd want to leave you with are that, number one, the very positive news is that psychological first aid, as the recognised preferred model of service for people that have been affected by trauma, is a very close fit to what we already do in victim support. So that's, I think, a very good news story, and that what we're doing is saying that 30 years of experience has taken us to a very good place in terms of the evidence for what we do, the researched evidence for what we do and the benefit of that. But we also then have to face up to some of the challenges in what we do. For example, one of the points of psychological first aid is that it's very unlikely that somebody would get the benefit that they could get from just one single face-to-face. There are other issues in our practice that we'll work through, but that's for another day. Thank you.